Hi, everybody. Welcome. And welcome to you, Kim, today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm speaking with Kim Rosen today. Kim is a poetry artist, a healer, a spiritual teacher, and also the funder of the She Fund, which helps African young women go to college. And she's also working with African girls and young women through poetry. So Kim can tell you more about this if you're interested. Also, you can go to her website, kimrosen.net, which will tell you all about that. But today we'll be speaking about the power of poetry. And Kim will start us off with the Guesthouse, one of the most well-known poems by Rumi, and it's always an invitation, always anew. So if you know it well, I hope you can hear it as if you're hearing it for the first time. And it's wonderful to have you, Kim. I'm really excited to speak to you about poetry and transmission.
I am excited to speak with you too. Let me begin, as said, with The Guesthouse, which is by Rumi and translated by Coleman Barks. And I must say, I probably have spoken this poem as many times as it's been downloaded off of Google, which is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. And there has never been a time when I've spoken it that it wasn't completely fresh and that I didn't hear something new in it. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if it's a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house clear of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Greet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Even if it's a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house clear of its furniture, the dark thought, the shame, the malice, greet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. It's The Guesthouse by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, who is a great friend to all of us for making Rumi accessible in a way no one has in the past.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim.
Mm.
And maybe I'll just share with everybody what I just shared with you, that spontaneously I shared in my last meditation retreat this poem because my harmonium didn't work. I couldn't do the chanting. And somebody heard it so powerfully that he was really, it transported him into a depth of meditation that he had hardly known before. only very rarely. And he told me that. And you know that and when I shared that with you, Kim, you shared with me that you tend to start all of the events that you do with this poem.
Mm.
So clearly poems can be so powerful in speaking something in images so directly that's hard to put in words usually. And I wonder whether you could, from your perspective of having spoken so many poems before and having spoken a poem during a retreat that we both attended and inspired me to talk to you about poetry, because really the poem you spoke was so alive and so it resonated
Mm.
so fully with me that I just felt I wanted to talk to you about this power that poems have to to transport us and to transmit what cannot be spoken
Mhm.
easily.
Mm.
And maybe you could tell us how that is for you, both how you understand that and also what it is like to be speaking poetry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I speak poetry completely selfishly. As I imagine any teacher or student, whether they're an artist or a spiritual teacher or a classroom teacher or a therapist, you know how you benefit. And this is not a sweet thing to say. This is just the truth. I think I benefit more from speaking the poem than the people who may be listening to the poem. And I benefit whether I speak the poem alone to myself, when I have the sanity to remember. It's like, for me, it's like, gosh, the rubies. This is such an American thing to say, but in The Wizard of Oz, which I realize is not kind of a basic part of the literature of every country, but it is in the United States. The
Mm,
Wizard of Oz, and Dorothy's stuck in Oz and she can't get home. And then she finds out that she always had the power to go home, that she has these ruby slippers on, and that all she has to do is click her heels 3 times and she can go home. And I and everyone, but certainly we have multiple ruby slippers at our disposal. I mean, the
mm,
simple breath is a ruby slipper. A
yeah.
deepened breath is a ruby slipper, or a kirtan is a ruby slipper, or looking at a tree can be a ruby slipper. But for me, I've been lucky to happen into the practice of learning poems by heart for many years now, since about 1994. And so I have all these scriptures lining the interior sanctuary, and able to reach up and pull one of them down, pull one of these scriptures down and speak it, and it will realign me.
Mhm,
Um, the challenge is choosing to do that in my humanness, where I get very bound in my human stories. There is this energy that doesn't want, poof, as soon as I speak the poem, poof, it's not that the story is gone. It's that I am relocated to my true self.
mhm,
Even if it is a poem and I have a mission and a soapbox to wake people up, wake especially people who are in the cultures I have the joy of frequenting, the spiritual cultures and the psychologically um, awake cultures, I have a soapbox about it's not just Rumi. And it's not even just Mary Oliver. There are extraordinary poets throughout history, and some of them are alive today, and women or women of color. There are poets who have known what we know, who can become the scriptures of our souls, no matter how seemingly, I don't know what word to use, mundane the subject matter. Do you know, like, let me just say a poem by Ellen Bass for a moment that
Mhm.
is seemingly of mundane subject matter, but all of her poems, for me, open into an aha that goes beyond my mind. Um, Even if I know her, she's a friend of mine, she may not hold the same spiritual values and beliefs as I do, but there's something about when words take us beyond the mind that in itself, regardless of the subject matter or even the consciousness of the person who wrote them, when words, I like to say, poetry uses the mind to unlock the mind.
Mhm.
Poetry uses words to unlock the mind. And so when that happens and the mind, you can hear the click open of the mind, that's an experience of the truth of being,
Mhm.
whatever caused it. Do you know?
Mhm.
So Ellen's poem, for instance, it's a short poem called Prayer. She says, once I wore a dress liquid as vodka. My lover watched me ascend from the subway like I was an underground stream breaking through. I want to stop wanting to be wanted like that. I'm tired of the song the rain sings in June, the ravenous green, the chorus of hope, the earth with her loamy head and crown of spiky trees. There are things I've wanted, like everyone. But of this angel of wishes I've worshipped so long, I ask now to admit the world as it is. I'll say it again just so you can steep in it. Once I wore a dress liquid as vodka. My lover watched me ascend from the subway like I was an underground stream breaking through. I want to stop wanting to be wanted like that. I'm tired of the song the rain sings in June, the ravenous green, the chorus of hope, the earth with her loamy head and her crown of spiky trees. There are things I've wanted, like everyone, but of this angel of wishes I've worshipped so long, I ask now to admit the world as it is. Do you see? She doesn't say one thing about God or love or truth or beingness uh, or transmission or teaching. Do you know?
Mhm.
But there we are. So you asked about how, I don't know if you asked how, but as you can see, you drop in a question and I could go on for hours, but I won't. Um, but I will. I will say just, and we can go into this more
Mhm.
clearly if you choose. I feel. I think I said this to you when we were speaking once before. I have had the great blessing of inadvertently meeting Gangaji in 1997 when I wasn't looking for a guru. I didn't believe in gurus. I didn't believe in spiritual teachers. I was looking for a nice silent retreat, and I'd never heard of her, but it was near my house, so I could save money by commuting to the retreat. And this woman walks in and says what she says and does what she does for a week. And I found, and I personally don't like to talk about this without poetry because I don't feel that I ever do it justice, but just to not take too much time to grope for the words, I discovered the freedom that I didn't exist. That I, as I had thought I existed, didn't. And that I was this that is alive, that is not contained in the mind, but in which the mind is contained. So I didn't mean to discover that, but it was the greatest gift of my life, one of the greatest gifts of my life, certainly, or maybe what my life was about. And what I've found since then is that a poem can briefly take the place of a guru. A piece of music can briefly, I mean, in a time limited way, for the duration of the piece of music, can be a holding, mm, can infuse a field in the way that Gangaji was able, who knows how, through grace, to open something that I didn't even know was closed.
Mhm.
And since I can't, I'm not the type of person, and I don't choose to be in the type of culture where I could spend the rest of my life sitting at the feet of a guru, um, in whose energetics I could perhaps more easily access um, what's always here. We have these portals. Call it a kirtan, call it a poem, call it a piece of music, call it a sangha, which has an effect, and I won't pretend to scientifically know what that is, of um, dissolving the veils that fictitiously separate us from what's true, right? And I do know, this is what I wanted to say, I do know a little bit about how a poem can do that. And there's a chapter in my book called what I call the shamanic anatomy of a poem, that it's not all magic and things that can't be named. There are certain mechanics
Mhm.
that can contribute to why this happens.
Mhm.
Um, but the fact that it happens is the transmission.
Mhm.
And the miracle is that it happens perhaps with a poem written by someone who doesn't even know how to spell the word awakening, was never interested, never heard of it. It can happen with a poem like that, and it can reach to us from a poem that's written by someone who's quite completely awake, like Rumi or Kabir. Um, the miracle is that the door opens.
Yeah. Yeah. From my perspective, what I found, what struck me so much when I heard you speak this poem was that I'm not usually one who goes for poetry, because for me, words are often like distracting. Um, I tend to either chant or be quiet.
Mm, mm, mm,
Or speak in a context where words come but are not premeditated, are not words that I even know. It's like, when I work with clients, or I lead a meditation retreat or a Sangha gathering, words just come.
mm, mm.
And I'm just willing to say whatever comes. So it's like, for me, words often are, if they're not in the moment, they're just very distracting. I can't really describe it, but for somebody to use words like a poem that can be on a page, and if I look at it on a page, it's like, it can work, but most of the time it doesn't.
Mhm.
But when I hear it spoken and it's alive, there's something that happens. And traditionally, poets like Rumi has this image of the hollow reed. The poet is the hollow reed through which comes the transmission.
Mhm.
And I was reflecting on that, and I was thinking, well, actually, part of the transmission is that when a poem is spoken, it's like that opening, it's there in you, and that's what transmits itself too,
Yes,
because you're open to the poem.
yes,
And
yes,
so it's like you're not just a hollow reed, actually, your very openness is what transmits itself too.
yes,
And what feels to me like that contributes to the opening in the person then who hears it.
yes. Yes, beautiful. Yes, the poem is literally, I think probably literally, if we could see the auric and biochemical changes happening within two people listening to a poem, one speaking it, one not. It's literally building a bridge of resonance. It's literally the pouring of one stream, one vibration into another,
Yeah.
right? And in the last chapter of the book that I wrote about this, called Saved by a Poem, the last chapter, I talk about lasers and what happens with the coherence of lasers when a weak laser is in the vibe of a stronger laser. The weak laser remembers its stronger self. And so I think it happens between me and the poem, that in my speaking, even if you're not here, in my speaking the poem to myself, the poem summons me
Mhm.
to my fuller, truer self. And when we're both together, for many years, I'm kind of phasing it out now, as far as I know. But what do I know? I've led a mystery school for many, many years, and part of it is about. Here's the punchline of the mystery school. To some extent, in terms of the extent to which it has to do with speaking poetry as medicine, the punchline is that speaking a poem is not about giving a poem, it's about receiving a poem
Mhm.
and being willing to be nakedly available to others as you receive the poem, right? So,
Beautiful. So,
yes,
there's an openness and a receptivity in that.
letting
Like
myself be
the hero.
yeah, my friend, after my book was published, said, it has the wrong title. The title of the book was Saved by a Poem. She said that the title should actually be Slain by a Poem, because it really is 100 ways to make yourself available to being slain by a poem. And to the extent that I am vulnerable, naked to that poem, and bring you with me. I mean, I'm not consciously bringing you with me. I'm simply allowing us to be together as part of the alchemy
Mm.
as I make myself vulnerable to this poem.
Yes.
You receive or
Mhm.
you storm out of the room, but mostly people receive, you know.
Yes, because you know that as I understand it, that very nakedness, that very act of opening oneself to this poem as it's experienced in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
or to this moment, whatever it's about, that that opening, that kind of letting go of any defenses that we may have, any stories about it, any thoughts about it, any feelings about it, just this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what invites that direct, open being in the other, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, yeah.
It's like
And go
nothing
ahead.
else can in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
can
Mm-hmm.
it? I mean, because it's kind of like that's the invitation, is being in that directness invites that in the other.
Yes, yeah. It's radical. Could use the catch word, which I really like. I like that it's become a catch word, authenticity. It's radical authenticity, but I would say it's radical intimacy.
Hmm.
Do you know?
I like that much better than authenticity, because authenticity is like there's something you're meant to be authentic to, which is
Yeah.
already makes
Yes. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
right. Where
Yes.
intimacy is like
Yeah.
there's then no distinction between us and what we're intimate with, because
Yes.
that is intimacy.
Yes. 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 Beautiful. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So somehow it's like your willingness to be so naked with this poem that you're speaking, that's the
To
invitation.
let it slay me. And another way to say that in a way is a wonderful, wonderful Christian, but way beyond Christian thinker, teacher, monk named Brother David Steindl-Rast. Yeah. And he said, what distinguishes great poetry is the element of surprise.
Mhm.
In order for it to be a real poem, poetry needs to surprise you.
Mm.
And I feel that why a poem surprises us, and that Guesthouse poem that's been said hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times can still surprise me. It does. If it doesn't, there's something closed down in me, you know,
Yeah.
is because of that using the mind to unlock the mind, that springing open of the mind, you know. And I will say, just to go back to what you said about you didn't think of yourself as someone who likes poetry. There are as many different kinds of poetry as there are different kinds of music and different kinds of art. I think for some reason people forget that about poetry. If I say, oh, I love music, and you put on a heavy metal band, there's a chance I might not resonate
Mhm.
with that particular form of music, legitimate as it is,
Mhm.
as a form of music.
Mhm.
So there are poems we resonate with and poems we don't, you know. And, there's a poem which I don't know by heart by Leonard Cohen, who is my God. Leonard, if I have a God, it's Leonard Cohen. Um, but it begins, and it's called Basket. And the beginning of it is something like, you must go around from place to place, finding the poems that were meant for you. Do you know?
Mhm.
It's one among hundreds that's meant for you. Just like it's one piece of music, maybe you know the genre, but there are those pieces of music that you hold close.
Mm.
It's the same with poetry. Yeah. Mm.
And I would still say, there's pieces, there's poetry or there's music that's just so divine. And, maybe that's not a good word to use, but I'm just remembering I watched a film about Beethoven,
Mm,
Immortal Beloved, recently.
mm,
And the story is not so important, but the music in that film was so beautiful.
mm,
Film transported me into spheres of beauty, way beyond
mm,
what um, what the film was about,
mhm,
because
mm.
the music is so powerful.
And yet, some of what this is what's fascinating to me, although it
That
really is
my part of my basket, right?
right, right. But it's part of your basket, and your basket, your music basket, let's say, you grew up in a certain culture with certain kinds of music around you, some of which you were drawn to, some of which you weren't. But another person who grew up, say, who's 26 right now and grew up in America, may or may not resonate. And yet it doesn't negate it's not that music, period, is a door opener. It's that given the particular alchemy of my own um, uh, human personal makeup and that music, the door opens to the beyond personal,
Mm,
you
mm,
know? So that's what's fascinating to me, say, even about a poem. One person's going to need a poem that rhymes because they grew up in a different time period than I did. And so there's something about the rhythmic, um, maybe neurological pulsations in their body that opens to that,
mhm.
right?
Maybe. And, there's also the surprise.
Hmm.
Like the surprise that you found when you recited a poem to these African girls,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they they knew
Yes.
they knew that.
Yes, that's so true.
So it's not just our
Yes.
background and what that makes us
Hmm.
sensitive to and open to,
Absolutely.
but the divine gift of something
Mm.
is that it has the power to open the heart of
Mhm.
somebody who's
Yes.
not predisposed to
Yes.
open, to that.
That's gorgeous. Yes, it's
They've
such an
never
important
come
thing.
across it.
Mhm.
They've never heard a piece of classical music or a poem by Mary Oliver or whatever, and yet there is something
Mhm.
that resonates more deeply,
Yes.
and more directly
Mhm.
than they could be predisposed towards.
Mhm. Yes, that's a very important point. And thank you for that. Really true. Really true.
Well, I think it's both. But
Mm.
when we're talking about the power of poems,
Mhm.
you know, I do feel the guest house. I mean, it is a particularly powerful poem
Mhm.
because it speaks to the human condition so directly,
Mhm.
so fully,
Mhm.
and in such a healing way.
Mhm.
When it says, open the door laughing.
Mhm.
I mean, wow, how freeing is that?
Yes,
You know,
yes, yes.
and
Mm.
how at the same time, how fully does the poem name all the ways that we get caught,
Yeah.
and we get trapped by our thinking, by our feeling, by our, whatever, our stories.
Mhm.
And somehow it invites us into something very different, into an openness.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm thinking about how, when I used to go to Kenya before the pandemic, and when I hope to go to Kenya again soon, um, still
Mm,
holding out that prayer and hope. Um, and for a few years, I've brought a small group of funders along with me. I always have the group of funders learn the guest house by heart and perform it as a choral performance for the girls in the safe house. And these are girls who are between the ages of, say, 7 or 8 years old and maybe 19 years old. Some of them have just run away. All of them have run away from female genital mutilation or early childhood marriage at some
mm,
point. And some of them have just arrived, and they call them the younger sisters, and some of them are the older sisters, and they're soon to graduate high school. And in Kenya, the usual form of poetry speaking is in a choral speaking.
mm,
Everything's the group mind is just breathtaking among the people I work with. And so they can speak a poem perfectly, 50 girls who are totally, like 50 girls that age would be, totally chaotic and noisy, but you give them a poem, they can speak it as if they had been working on it. It would take Americans months to get to the level of coherence
mm,
that those girls get to. And so I work with the Americans who I bring, Americans and Canadians so far, who I bring to do a choral poem in their style. And yet it's the guest house,
mm,
which they completely, completely understand.
mm,
And I do want to say something about the guest house, which is that the guest house, like any poem, has layers and layers and layers and layers and layers, and your layers are different than mine. But there are two obvious layers in this poem, and I didn't hear the second layer until I met Gangaji.
mm.
Mostly people hear about welcoming your feelings,
Yes.
which is wonderful. It's fine, it's great. And about the task of welcoming your feelings. But that's not the name of the poem.
Mm,
The name of the poem is the guest house. The focus of the poem is on that which the feelings come and go from, that which is present in the deepest sorrow, wiping our houses clear of its furniture,
mm,
and in the greatest joy, that which is still the same, that Rumi has called the guest house.
mm,
And as I age, and I don't think this is necessarily a function of age, but I think it's a function perhaps of tenacity, I must say that my interest in that poem is more and more on the guest house,
mhm.
on this thing that can only be said in metaphor, that's present
Yes.
in the sorrow, present in the shame, in the malice,
Mm.
in the joy, in the depressions, present, same guest house, right?
It's interesting, that very aspect of it struck me when I recited it. When I
Mm-hmm.
found it, for my meditation retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it struck me how much the poem is a metaphor also for the the sitting, the
Mm-hmm.
who sits and
Mm-hmm.
who receives and lets go and receives and lets go.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes.
And they are that space in
Yeah.
which everything comes and goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe that's why it is so powerful, because it addresses people at a level of experience, or it kind of, it names a level of experience that everybody knows.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, through its imagery, it invites an opening that's much deeper than that,
Yes.
much
Yes.
more full than that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Mm.
clearing us out. Well,
Mm-hmm.
at that human level, nobody wants to be cleared out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But but at the deeper level, of course we want to be cleared out.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
And somebody may hear that and never have thought about it like that, and yet they get it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see? That's the power of
Mm-hmm.
an image. I really understand that in a new way.
Yes. And there's something that fascinates me about metaphor or simile or image, as you say. Um, I feel them to be like, not just like a Zen koan, but actually being a koan, or being, in the Kabbalah, there's a practice or of holding opposites at the same time in your mind, or in Yoga Nidra, there's the practice of holding opposites, and in a koan, it's the practice of holding an impossible question, if I understand correctly. And so a metaphor is something, it has to be something that does not make sense,
Mhm.
even if it's a crowd of sorrows that violently sweeps your house clear of its furniture. How many metaphors are there? Crowd of sorrows. Let's start with that. A crowd of sorrows. So you have the image of a crowd of people, probably, and you have the feeling of sorrows, and those two things, and in the space between those two things, that the poet's not trying to legislate how you receive it, but somehow those things come together in you, and the mind can't understand it. So
Mm.
it drops to a deeper level
Yes.
of experience and presence, right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, just that note, that phrase, crowd of sorrows.
Mm-hmm.
I just understood it as sorrows crowding the inner space, which is
Mm-hmm.
what people often experience when they're dealing with a lot of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
pain, inner
Mm-hmm.
pain. It's like
Yeah.
really, literally, their space is crowded out by the pain,
Yeah.
the sorrow.
But even that, you're using metaphors without knowing it, making the word crowd into a verb is creating a metaphor.
Yes.
Do you know?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Hmm. Yeah, so this is what I mean about, there is a medicine bag that a poet has at her disposal to foster the
Mm.
breaking open of the mind.
Yeah.
And metaphor, image is one of them,
Mm.
one of the things in her medicine bag. And another thing is rhythm,
Mm.
that we may not, in a less obvious poem like Coleman's translations of Rumi, we may not notice the rhythm, but there is a rhythm. We become entrained into the rhythm, and that entrainment literally changes the biochemistry of the fluid around the brain so that brain waves change. And I'm not saying that changed brain waves are awakening, but I am saying that it sure can help to open the mind, that we can fall out of the mind
Mhm.
when our brain waves are changed out of the ordinary infinite information based duty of the brain.
Yes, I think rhythm is like it's an invitation into almost the timeless, because
Mm-hmm.
because when we follow meaning, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is when we listen, just listen to words, when we follow meaning, there's always a kind of horizon of time.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a rhythm, you kind of get
Mm-hmm.
into just settling
Beautiful.
rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a relaxation in that.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
and a kind of almost a timelessness, because a rhythm can go on forever, right? It kind of just repeats
Mm-hmm.
endlessly.
Yes.
And as
Yes.
such, it invites letting go of the time directed,
Mm-hmm.
oriented, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
invites us into just a kind of, I'd say, a relaxation and a timelessness, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and many of us will not even know with a modern poem or a modernly translated poem that we are being entrained into a rhythm. And yet there is a biophysical sense of being held
Hmm.
that also allows ourselves to let go. I mean, I think for me, that's part of it. It's the swaddling of the fretful baby of our ego, in that rhythm, in that sound, in that kirtan, whatever it is, the holding so that it can let go within it,
Yes,
right?
yes. And it's almost like an archetypical language, that we came across as babies and
Mm-hmm.
kind of recognize,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And we came across it in the womb, right?
yes,
We were steeped in it in the womb, no matter what was going on. There it was. And we were entrained in it. And so was my cat. Every mortal thing was entrained in rhythm
yes.
before they were born.
Hmm. 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 So let me ask you, since I'm more of a chanter, and of course that has a rhythm too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel there's a difference between chanting and poetry, reciting poetry?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Especially if the chanting is in another language. Um, but even if the chanting is in the language that we all speak, but often kirtan is in another language. And I think that chanting has a medicine to take us into the vastness of our being, that which is not confined by the human catastrophe, as Zorba the Greek said so famously. I feel the medicine of poetry simply because it is words, summons us into the human catastrophe at the same time as it opens us beyond it. And so to me, it's not a mistake that the Christian Bible begins, in the beginning was the Word, right? So I always think, well, what I'm really interested in is what was before the beginning, right? The non manifest. So as soon as you have the Word, you have a body. as soon as you have a body, you do have a history. You have a history of horrors and wonders. And that's just a fact.
Mhm.
For everyone I know who is human, including the Christs and the Buddhas, as soon as there's a body, which is the Word made flesh
Mhm.
is a body. And so, on that kind of archetypal mythic level, anything that comes to us in words includes the human catastrophe, I believe. Either that or it's really bad poetry. Um, there may be roses are red, violets are blue, blah, 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 and I love you that doesn't actually evoke your human catastrophe, but it really evokes mine, right? um, but as soon as there's a word,
Mhm.
it's the holy and the broken. Hallelujah, as Leonard Cohen says. So I feel that it's a fiercer, honestly, I feel it's a fiercer um, uh, invitation sometimes than singing kirtan or dancing or creating abstract art, um, because it does evoke the holy and the broken. Hallelujah
Mhm.
to our awareness.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I really hear that, and it's true that I don't know, actually, I was going to say it's true that chanting, certainly when one chants mantra, you
that's what I was meaning. Yeah.
it really evokes the divine.
Yes.
But actually, on the background of the human, because what we bring to chanting, I mean, one of my all-time favorites is Krishna Das. And like you, he
Mm-hmm.
says he doesn't chant for other people. He chants,
Mm-hmm.
that's his practice. He chants for himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Him chanting is a way of
Yes.
celebrating his guru.
Yes, and Krishna Das's voice as everyone's voice, but it's really obvious in his voice. The human catastrophe is woven right into that, which is
Yes.
probably what we love about him, you
Yes,
know.
absolutely. And he says, do I have an empty mind when I chant? No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it,
Mm-hmm.
it gets quieter as I'm chanting.
Yes.
So it's like he's somebody who's kind of quite okay with talking about the catastrophe that happened
Yes.
at the same time as
Mm.
he's chanting and
Mhm,
he's
mhm.
invoking the divine.
Yes, yes, yeah.
He's singing a love song to his guru. So it's like, you know, um, and I have a chant that goes, "You are love, you are light."
Mm.
And you'd think it's just about that, but actually it isn't. Because the chant only makes sense because we know how humanly challenged we
Yes,
are
yeah.
to be love and light.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm,
that's why it's such a powerful invitation, because
mhm,
if we were all there all the time, the chant wouldn't make any sense.
mhm.
But
That's great.
you
Yes.
know, but it's true that the human catastrophe, I mean, that's why the guest house is so beautiful, right?
Mhm,
It's
mhm,
about both. It
mhm,
names both, it invites us
mhm,
to hold both.
mhm. Yes, and if my chant were, this is just a evocative question. I am love, I am light, I am hate, I am spite, I am shame, I am glory, I am nothing, I am the story. I am here, I am there, I am in, I am out, I am before, I am after, I'm a smile, I'm a pout. Who knows? But I think maybe all of that is wrapped up in you are love, you are light,
Yeah.
because it'll bring all of that up.
Yes. I mean, of course, it's implicit in the
Hmm.
chant. It's not explicit.
Yes,
And
no,
there's a beauty in putting it all out there, right?
yes, yes,
The
yes,
catastrophe and the divine.
yeah, yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, I really see that. And I see how poems through their metaphors and
Hmm.
their words that can evoke, so
Hmm.
much that we recognize.
Hmm.
How they can do that in a very powerful way.
Yes, yes, yeah. And there is a specific, I mean, there's other challenges when one sings. There are challenges just having the sound and breath moving through the body and resonating all that's inside the body, that can come forth when we breathe and sing, that can't come forth when we are not breathing and holding our voice back, right? So there's all of that.
Mm,
And there's a special medicine in a poem. Many people um, choose to write poems that are very glorious and very much speaking to the glorious and you know, and yet when you study the art of poetry writing, and this is very fierce for me,
mhm,
you're summoned into the very specific. Every poetry teacher, the first lesson will be don't say love. Find a way to say through the senses
mm,
what that is.
mhm,
Do you know the smell of my child's breath after his first taste of my breast milk?
mm,
That's a very different thing than
mhm,
saying love, right?
mhm,
And light, what dawn looked like through the window of the concentration camp. It's a different thing. And for me, I just want to say, it's hard for me to articulate because I'm not as masterful at it as I'd like to be. That summoning myself into specifics
mhm,
is a fierce practice.
mhm,
And it's what we love about Coleman Barks's translations of Rumi, as opposed to some other translations that don't get down to the nitty gritty, sensate
mhm,
the way Coleman does.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I'm not so versed in the different translations. I just know that Coleman Barks translations are very evocative, they're very
Yes,
powerful. They speak
yes,
very directly.
yeah.
That's how I would describe them, as a non-poet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, and that's the test.
Mm, mm, hmm. Something's on the tip of my tongue, but I've forgotten it again.
I understand very
Oh,
well.
yes, yes. Poetry as healing. As I was listening to you, Kim, it struck me that finding finding a way of evoking the experience of human suffering and the particular the peculiarity of humans.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
finding a way of doing that can be so healing because people recognize themselves in that.
Yes.
And when a poem then also opens the possibility of that and something more, even more open, even, something free or something.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
As,
It's, you know,
as in the poem, I forget the name of the poet.
yeah, I didn't tell you the name, which I should. It's called Prayer.
Prayer.
That
Yes,
poem, Once I Wore a Dress Liquid as Vodka.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's like there's an opening into something that's vaster,
Mm-hmm.
that's less limited, that's less
Mm-hmm.
taken, less stuck somehow
Yes.
in the
Yes.
in the human catastrophe. And that feels like that really is very healing
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
read and to hear and to experience, because when the poem really speaks to us, we experience that opening.
Yes,
We know
exactly. Even if the poem doesn't,
good in
even if the
humanity.
poem doesn't, sorry.
So sorry, I'll say it's like we know that we're seen and understood in our humanity, and
Mm-hmm.
yet there's also something that opens us beyond that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's even if the poem does not resolve, even if it simply names it.
Mhm.
There's a beautiful quote, which I won't get exact. It's about Anna Akhmatova during the years of the Yezhov terror in the Russian Revolution. And she says, I forget, I spent 20 months standing in line outside the prison in the freezing air, and nobody spoke there. And one day, a woman with blue lips turned to me and she said, "Can you describe this?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And then something like the shadow of a smile came over what once was her face.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so there is something in the human alchemy that when something is named, even if it's not named in words, if it's a photograph or something, when something is named and put in a frame, like a poem, right? Or a photograph or a song that has a frame around it
Mm.
so that I can take this in and it bursts open my own experience, right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
Mhm. So, Kim, what strikes me is what seems to be like a bit of a golden thread in this conversation is that there's somehow what poetry seems to have a particular, I don't know, lend itself to,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more than other forms like music, is that it's able to provide that frame for the humanity
Mm-hmm.
and also allow an opening to something beyond that.
Yes, beautiful.
It strikes me the very
Mm-hmm.
awareness
Mm-hmm.
of a particular condition, say,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the catastrophe.
Right. Yeah.
The very awareness of it in naming that already creates
Yes.
space, doesn't it?
Well, and isn't it what
And
happens
that's healing.
when we turn towards whatever we've been turning away from, whatever has felt too difficult to enter and face when we simply open and enter that agony that we never thought we could bear, or that feeling of worthlessness, um, or even the pain in your hip that we are turning away from. As soon as we turn towards it and open to it, I mean, Rumi says, learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Welcome difficulties like a familiar comrade. Joke with torment brought by the friend. Sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover for a while and then are taken off. That undressing and the beautiful naked body underneath is the sweetness that comes after grief. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. So I see myself in that poem, and I see it in the frame of a poem that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a picture frame. I can take it in because it's held in a frame. I can embrace that hurt. I can call it to my arms where it can change, right?
Yes. Beautiful. Maybe we should end with that poem, Kim.
Beautiful. Gosh, it's been such a joy to talk with you, Grace. I don't usually have the opportunity to explore these dimensions of how poetry lives and works in me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, because I just followed a call to talk to you, and I never know what comes of these conversations. But this is, I feel deeply touched by just the humanity and the beyond at the same time. And the beauty of that paradox, and living it every moment of our lives.
Yeah, the holy and the broken, hallelujah.
Yeah. And being understood in that by a poem.
Yes, beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this communion. It's precious time.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you. And I just want to say, will you recite that poem for us? The one that you just kind of spontaneously went into.
Again? Sure.
Yes. To end with. So before we end, we just say thank you. Thank you. That's really beautiful. And if people want to find out more about your work, as in the She Fund, they can go to your website, I think.
Yes, there's two different websites, but it will link. If you go to kimrosen.net, you'll find out about my work with poetry. I'm offering free events every month now since the pandemic started. So they're free Zoom events every month, poetry events. And there's also a link on that website to the She Fund if you're interested in more information about that. And it's kimrosen.net. It's not kimrosen.com. That's somebody else. It's kimrosen.net.
And the title of your book is Saved by a Poem. I forgot to.
Yes. Yeah. What a joy to be with you. Here is Undressing by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks. It's called Undressing. Learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Welcome difficulties like a familiar comrade. Joke with torment brought by the friend. Sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover for a while and then are taken off. That undressing and the beautiful naked body underneath is the sweetness that comes after grief. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim.
Mm.
Thank you. Truly beautiful.
Mm.
What a gift.